Hello, everyone. Welcome to Byron K. Ward presents Business Leadership with Action. And we are thrilled this morning to bring exemplary business leaders to share their life's journey with our audience. Most of these stories are from men and women of color, especially highlighting examples of business excellence from African Americans. So sit back and enjoy the positive stories of success, leadership, money, and inspiration. And today I have a smiling gentleman here. We are so very honored to host this exclusive interview with Mr. Guy Radford Walker. And Mr. Walker is the president and principal of Wealth Management Strategies Incorporated. And it is a great pleasure to have you here on the show today. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Now, we appreciate that you were able to make it into the studio. You had a little drive this morning. Tell our audience where you come to us from.
Well, it was a bit of a drive, but a delightful drive, and always a pleasure to be with you, Byron. I live in Santa Ynez, California, which is in Santa Barbara County, about 45 minutes north of the city of Santa Barbara, in wine country.
Okay, now that's a story within itself.
Indeed.
As we lead into you telling us a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing, how does a kid from Compton end up in Santa Ynez?
Great question. So I am a proud citizen of Compton, California. Grew up there in the late 50s through the 60s, 70s. But had an opportunity in the early 70s to attend a independent boarding school up in Santa Ynez, which is how I got my introduction to Santa Ynez. So the Dunn School, which is located in Los Olivos, California, in Santa Ynez Valley. I attended high school there, was there for 3 years. Thought when I finished my time at Dunn, I would leave and never come back, but obviously I was wrong. I moved back there in 1990 with my family and have been there ever since.
That's great. Now tell us, you were in Compton and you ended up going to a school in Santa Ynez. What was your family situation like?
Yeah, so for the listening audience, depending on your age and what you may or may not know about Compton, California, there's more to Compton than straight out of Compton. In the 50s, Compton was really a growing community of oil derricks and dairies, and had a wonderful life in Compton pretty much through my junior high school years. But in the 70s, we started to see in the transition, and my focus was going to college. And I was not quite clear how I was getting from Compton to college. And so when the opportunity came for me to go to this independent school, one of the things that I read in their brochures is that 100% of the kids who graduated from that school do attend college. So I was like, I still don't really understand how you get into college, but I do know my math pretty well. And if they're saying 100% go, all I needed to do was get through. So I did.
All right. So was were you in a two-parent household? Siblings?
Great question. So parents got divorced when I was 10, but both my parents were always very engaged in the raising of their children. We had 3 children in the family. So I had an older brother and an older sister. By the time I hit junior high school, my brother he's 10 years older, so he was up and out. My sister was a couple of years older, and so we lived primarily with my mother. But I would say, I feel blessed to have had my parents in my life their entire lives. And one of the things that I share with people is that I never spent a Christmas without both my parents until they died. And so even though they divorced when I was 10.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Now, at a young age, did you have any inklings about being a businessman?
Absolutely. So both my parents brought to the table different influences. My mother, I would say, clearly was the primary influence. And I think, my mother instilled in all three of her children that we had a purpose, essentially a God-given purpose, and it was up to us, including, with her guidance, for us to find it. Business was always a part of our upbringing. So, we had bank accounts as little children, we had allowances, we had chores, and all that. Some sort of was connected to really just the whole concept of how do you create money, where does it come from, and so I think I always had business in my head.
Well, that's great, and that's we don't hear that too often. That with youth with bank accounts and so forth.
Yeah. So I think back. My mother, who for many of my years growing up was a stay-at-home mom, but she was also, again, I'm dating myself a bit, but she was a Stanley representative. So Stanley was probably a precursor to Amway. And she was entrepreneurial, even though, really in many respects, she was at times a traditional stay-at-home mom. My mother was also a nurse, and for many years she was a social worker. And so, again, she was always industrious, always looking into business type things. My paternal grandmother, which I didn't really realize until I was well into my adult years, my paternal grandmother was a businesswoman. All the years as a child through my junior high school years that I would visit my paternal grandmother, she was a hat maker. And she had a business in the front of her house that she owned, which, again, as a child, I didn't really put a lot of thought into it. But as I got older, I started thinking, how does this woman born in the early 1900s, single mom, she doesn't have a traditional job. She sells these hats and makes these hats and sells jewelry and so forth and so on. So, I think I was influenced by some of this, even not knowing really what it was that my grandmother was doing.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Selling hats from the front of the house. I'm sure she had all the church ladies as her customers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cultural thing for us black folks, and the church ladies in their hats. No doubt there. So take us from done school to UCSB.
The journey. So, as I mentioned, Byron, there was never a question in my head about whether or not I was going to college. Both my parents pretty much instilled that in me, and it was sort of a foregone conclusion: you are going to college. That was fine. I think I was, a pretty decent student as a child and growing up. But somewhere in the early 70s, as I was hitting junior high school and starting to, get ready for high school, it was unclear to me what is the process for getting into college. And like a lot of teenagers, I didn't really want to go to my parents and tell them, I don't really understand how you get into college, because I assume they feel like, well, a guy knows what he's doing. But the truth of the matter is, I was a little nervous about it. And so when this opportunity came to go to Dunn, and as I said, when I realized that even though I still don't understand the process, I understand 100% of kids who graduate from these type of schools go to college. I jumped on it. And so graduated from Dunn in 1976, attended Vassar College, which is in upstate New York, Poughkeepsie, New York. Didn't realize I was making history at that point in time, but Vassar is what they call one of the seven sister schools, connected to the Ivy League, but Vassar had been historically a women's college.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. I knew that somewhat, but not really. And so when I attended Vassar had only been admitting men, I want to say, for 12 years. And in terms of African Americans, it may have been 6 years or 8 years before I got there that the first African Americans were attending Vassar. And so I went to Vassar, really, under some misguided notion that I was going to be, a 4.0 student for 4 years and come out and go conquer the world. I think that story is similar to a lot of African American students who, they are what we used to call the talented 10th. You're sort of put in this position where, you're the one. Well, the truth of the matter is I was just, after a year plus at Vassar, I was pretty much overwhelmed. I was in the process of starting to burn out, and we had some challenges going on at home, which gave me an excuse to say, well, I think I need to go home and help Mom. And so I left Vassar, came home, started working, making pretty good money for a 20-something-year-old, and with all the intentions of going back to college, but quite honestly was a bit distracted by my earnings. And so I stayed on that job for a few years, and then I went to what would have been my graduation from Vassar and saw my buddies graduate.
Oh, wow.
Then went across the river to see my best friend from Dunn School graduating from Princeton, and came home and submitted my resignation and got myself back into college. And so after a little bit of city college, I ended up at USC. I was there as an accounting major. And then the following summer, I went to Santa Barbara and met my wife, my future wife, and we decided to stay in Santa Barbara, so I transferred to UCSB. But by the time I got to USC, it was, I'm probably 8 years out of high school. And so I was working full time. I was really already a practicing accountant without the degree. And then got my degree in accounting, went to work for one of the local hospitals as a senior accountant. And I'll put a pause there.
We'll put a pause there, but if I recall from looking at your bio, not only accounting, but economics and Black studies.
Absolutely. And so that's my degree is it was a triple threat. It was economics, Black studies, political science, and then the economics piece was with an emphasis on accounting.
Okay, I did note that, and I wanted our audience to be aware of that econ component.
Yes.
I want to remind our listeners that this program is sponsored by Wealth Management Strategies Incorporated. At Wealth Management Strategies, we don't believe in generating wealth for the sake of generating wealth. Instead, we help you infuse purpose into your work and wealth so that you can live life meaningfully.
That's right.
Information is available at wealthmgtstrategies.com or 805-693-1773, or reach out at LinkedIn to Guy R. Walker. And we appreciate the support from you and your company
My pleasure.
in broadcasting
My
this
pleasure.
show.
Absolutely.
So we got you through college, and you're out there doing accounting. So how do you get from accounting to owning a business?
Yeah, great question. Love the question for all the budding entrepreneurs out there. I was happy in the world of accounting, and I'm thankful that I still get to utilize my skill set in my business today. But I was working in industry, working for one of the local hospitals in Santa Barbara, and had designs on becoming the CFO of that hospital at some point. And then I had my annual review.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, Cottage Hospital now has an African American. Is it the chief administrator or chief medical director?
The chief research director.
Chief research director.
Brother Richard Beswick.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, and certainly when I was there, that was nowhere in sight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out because that did come to my attention recently.
That's right. Yeah.
But go ahead.
So I had designs on becoming CFO. Had my annual review. Scored well on the annual review, but discovered I was being challenged, if you will, by my supervisor on things that felt like it was personality driven, not related to my work. And so I went back to my office and sat there and said, okay, so you want to be CFO. Your supervisor is 3 years younger than you, and the CFO is 4 years older than you, and I'm in my early 30s. And it just dawned on me, I may be sitting in this chair a long time before I make it to CFO. And so really in that moment, I just had clarity about, I think I want to go try to do something on my own. Didn't know what, but I think I had determined that something in me in terms of what I wanted and what I needed was to be able to control my own fate a bit more. And so I started looking, and I looked at everything from opening up an accounting office to a haberdashery to a restaurant to a tax service, just the full range. I started reaching out to people that I knew in the community who I had developed a network with, and started saying, I'm looking at making a transition, love to sit down and talk to you about my ideals. And I started that process. One of my close friends who also happened to have gone to Dunn School, was 10 years older than me, who was a CPA, and was at the time working for New York Life. He suggested that I go talk to the managing partner in New York Life. And I remember thinking, it's like, as much as I like and respect this guy, I have zero interest in selling life insurance. And so I told him that. And he said, well, I can understand. And it was interesting, the paradox, because I really respected this guy, thought a lot of him. He may have been my insurance agent. I can't remember now. But when he asked me to do that, I was like, hey, you've got to be kidding me.
You didn't think much of insurance agents.
I didn't think much of insurance, even though I thought a lot of him.
Exactly.
And so what he told me was, he said, even if you're not interested in the business, this managing partner knows everybody in town. And he would be a good person for you to just sit down with and talk to. So I did. And, with a bit of arrogance, I went and sat down with this managing partner, really in my head going, you could talk to your blue in the face, man. I am not coming to work here. And so he started talking and started taking me to lunch. And he took me to lunch either every week or every other week for about 8 months. And he finally started saying some things that were starting to crack a bell, which was, if I was focusing on working with businesses, I could still do the accounting work that I like to do, because I review balance sheets and financial statements. I like that. I like the fact that I control my own time. I still didn't really understand what this insurance business was. But he said those things, and that attracted my attention. And I was still at college. And so, I had made the decision. I said, well, leap of faith, I'm going to go do this. And until I can figure out what I really want to do.
Okay.
And so off I went and signed a contract and went through New York Life's executive training program, which is a 3-year program. And survived that 3-year program, and then at the end of that 3rd year, opened up Wealth Management Strategies, Inc.
So apparently it was a good transition.
It was a very good transition. Yeah.
What was the training like?
So the training is, I mentor a lot of young people about the financial services industry. Financial industry is broad and vast. So everything from commercial banking to investment banking and everything in between, including the life insurance business. And so life insurance focuses on training you about the various ways that life insurance products can serve a niche need. And then they touch on all the other things. So you got some training in investments and mutual funds and stock market, but a lot of it was geared towards how to use life insurance in personal situations and business situations. And I kept thinking, well, what are they going to tell me for 3 years? It should take 3, but yeah, it is a 3-year process. So it's a lot of information. And 32 years later, I'm still taking courses and classes and learning because things change. And
Lifelong learner.
Lifelong learner, absolutely.
When you were in that training program, did you have to sell? Did you have to
Yes.
produce?
Yes.
So how did you manage
It was
the
scary.
training with the sales aspect?
So, I often say to people, and again, the way I describe even the relationship with New York Life, I'll say to people now, it's like if you decide you want to go through that training program, it's like, you can own a New York Life franchise. Really? I didn't know New York Life franchise. I said, well, do you know what it costs to own a New York Life franchise? And generally speaking, agent advisor will say, no, I don't. It says it takes you surviving 3 years of training. And if you survive that 3 years of training, you essentially own that contract. You can go get other contracts with other companies. But if you survive that 3 years, you then own that contract. But you are in business for yourself day one. And it's a little bit like owning a McDonald's franchise. You're in training at McDonald's, right? Because the corporate, they train you. But do you have to sell day one? Yes. And if you sell 0 burgers, you make 0 money.
Right.
And so it's the same thing in the financial services industry for the most part. So whether you're with one of the brokerage houses or with the insurance companies, there are some operations that have a variation on the theme in terms of compensation. But the bottom line is you're in business to provide information and services to clients. And if they are in need of the various products that you can offer, you place those products and you'll make a commission or get a fee.
Mm-hmm. So you have completed the training, and during that time you've established a customer base, obviously. So where was the motivation or the incentive to build a company per se, outside of the insurance license and the structure of New York Life?
Great question, Byron. I think I came to it with that in my mind, meaning I didn't really understand how these various pieces work. But over 3 years while I was getting the training, I did investigation and started understanding I could own this, if you will. Meaning, and when I say own this, I mean I can design this business any way I want to. I can brand it how I want to. I can set up a business model in a way that I was comfortable with, which is much more advisory than sales, much more counseling than sales. And I think I had that in my head early. And just over those 3 years, I understood that I could create that. Now, I do want to say again for the listening audience that my success was not a straight line. And I think anyone who starts a business, unless you have a lot of luck or a very rich uncle, it tends not to be a straight line. So yes, I was building a client base, but I was on a learning curve. And, those first probably 3 to 8 years, I still was trying to find my footing in terms of how much of this is connected to really my bigger purpose in life. And I think during that time, I was discovering that and working with people and putting in plans that would increase their quality of life. It became obvious to me. I developed some philosophies over that time about really what is wealth and what are core principles around wealth. And it's not all money and material things. There are some other pieces, some intangibles that are connected to true sustainable wealth. I discovered those things over a period of time. Had some great years, had some not so great years, but it took a while before I could say I was consistently making money and building the business.
That's tremendous story, and thank you for sharing those ups and downs, because sometimes the downs you get the greatest learning.
Absolutely.
And so thanks for sharing that. But tell us about the company, Wealth Management Strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, so you incorporate.
Yes.
I think if my research was accurate, in 2014 maybe?
Oh, no, I want to say 2004, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So the New York Life training program was 3 years. After that third year, heading into my fourth year in business, I opened up Wealth Management Strategies. I have always had a business background, so the accounting piece helped me when I was in industry and so forth and so on. So, I had an accountant. I had relationships with attorney, so I didn't have an attorney on retainer, but I had strong relationships with attorneys. I had a CPA that has been a business partner at times and worked closely with him. And so I knew I needed to create a structure that would allow me to maximize this business. And so we formed an S corporation in 2004. Set up a line of credit. So did all those sort of infrastructure things that were needed to sustain the business through ups and downs. Formed the business corporation to transfer liability issues and to protect our personal wealth, and just started going about the task of really developing these concepts of building sustainable wealth, generational wealth. Our clientele is broad, but at some point, I want to say maybe in the 2006, 7, 8, we started developing a focus for African American community. New York Life, I remained, to this day, still have a relationship with New York Life. They are a strategic partner with us. I served on a variety of advisory committees. One of those advisory committees was the African American marketing unit for New York Life. We developed the market for that company. And so we'll talk a little bit about the $50 billion empowerment plan, I would imagine, but that plan was targeting and starting to think intentionally about how do we build wealth in the Black community? How do we help the Black community build wealth?
Yeah, I do want to talk about that in this segment. Before we take a quick break, talk a little bit as much as you can share about the revenue and just briefly the structure of your business and your team.
Okay. So the team is the hard team, if you will. The people who are in my office, there are 5 of us. I have an executive assistant, Molly, who also happens to be my wife. So it's a family business. I have a gentleman named Warren Ritter. He really is in charge of client acquisition and retention. So part of his role is to help identify where there are some opportunities in kind of the region that we work. I have a gentleman named Jason Varnell who is really a part of my design team. So for executive benefits and for some of the more complicated pieces, he's that. And then Cross Andrade, who is our cultural markets and Spanish language specialist, so that we can serve the Spanish language population. That's the hardcore piece. The rest of it is, over these 30 years, I've developed a network of professionals really throughout the country that assist me in a variety of ways. So the things that we may or may not do in my office, I tend to have access to people who can help service my clients. Revenue streams, like any good business, every year we do some sort of annual planning, always trying to raise the bar a bit in terms of what our revenues are and what our net profit is. And so that's a process that I've been doing for maybe 25 years. I don't know if I've been doing it for the entire 30 years, which, again, it takes a while to get your legs as a business person. But if you really are in business for yourself, if you're running a business, you have to do annual plan, set goals, and then, we go about the process of trying to every year hit that metric.
All right. Well, I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to 99.3 FM. And this particular program is Byron K. Ward presents Business Leadership with Action. And our special guest today, Mr. Guy Walker. Our sponsor for today's program is Wealth Management Strategies Incorporated. And we thank you for tuning in. Mr. Walker is sharing some of his wisdom and his journey as a wealth manager. And he's built a company, and I'd like for him to share a little bit about his philosophy. He sits on several boards. So just take a few minutes and share your philosophy of business and life with us, please.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for the platform to respond to that. So I think when I think of my own business and probably what I share with others who are trying to start business is that I tend to approach it from an integrated standpoint. The business is not really separated from my philanthropic or my community piece. They're all connected in some way, shape, or form. And so if you go to the website, for example, I talk a lot about the 3 pillars of wealth. And those 3 pillars are, first pillar is cultural wealth, which has to do with how well do you understand yourself, know yourself, your values, your principles, where you come from, why you have the beliefs that you have, and really, what is it that you won't do for $1, right? Which has to do with integrity and some other pieces. The second pillar of wealth is community wealth. And community wealth has to do with how do you invest in those communities that you claim. And again, one of the examples that I often give is you can be Black, but that doesn't make you a part of the community, right? So if you don't invest in that community, you probably really shouldn't claim it as a community. It doesn't take you away from being, your melanin and who your parents are. But the reality is if you're not investing in the community in some way, shape, or form, time, talent, or treasure, it's probably not really accurate for you to say you belong to that community. If you're part of the church community, that you don't really show up to church, you don't really tithe, or you don't give to the church, you don't support the church, you show up at Easter, you show up at Christmas. Okay, you're a member of the church, but that'll make you a member of the church community. And so we believe that in both cultural wealth and community wealth, those things are as real as the air that you breathe, right? You can't see air either. But you know it's real, and you know it's there. And then the third pillar is capital wealth, which is the thing that people tend to focus on most. It is important, but it is not really the most important thing. If you don't have the first two pillars, the third pillar doesn't do you any good. And so that's the heart and soul of the philosophy of wealth management strategy.
Well, that's a compelling picture there. So that's a foundation on which you make all that money and help those folks,
That's
right?
That's right.
Tell us about some of the programs that you've developed or are a part of.
In terms of my nonprofit work?
Whatever you want to share with us.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the community wealth piece, which, it's also nonprofit work. And boy, I hope I don't get myself in trouble if I leave somebody out. but I think I currently serve on 4 or 5 boards. Endowment for Youth Community, which is a board that I am the current chair of, based out of Santa Barbara, primarily focusing on serving the needs of young African American students, social, cultural, academic. I serve on the Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. Let's do it again. I serve on the San Ynez Valley Cottage Hospital Foundation Board, where we basically raise money to support the hospital in San Ynez. I serve on the Dunn School Board, which is where I went to high school. I am the incoming chair of that board and doing just phenomenal things over there. We just recently hired the first African American head of school for Dunn.
Outstanding.
And so you're just excited about that. And there's somebody that I'm leaving off, but I'm sure I'll hear about
That's
it.
all right. The point you're making is that you believe in giving back.
Absolutely. I think for me, it really is ultimately our full purpose. How are we supporting the communities that we claim? And I think we are shallow in many respects if you have not fully developed your communities. I think, certainly from even the financial work that I do, the frustration that I see with people who often, you make good money, you've accumulated good money, you have wealth, you have capital wealth, but you seem terribly unfulfilled and not happy. And often when I examine those folks, it is you don't have strong cultural wealth, which means you're not really clear about who you are. I don't really like to get on the religious soapbox too much from the standpoint of I have some strong beliefs and ideals about that. But I'll just say you haven't found a source or a purpose greater than yourself, right? And so whether you call that religion, whatever you happen to call that,
right.
you haven't identified that. Perhaps your family relationships were not great, so you don't lean on that. Your personal relationships are not great. So from a cultural wealth standpoint, you feel kind of empty. And you're searching, and you want people to like you, and you got a lot of money, so it's like, well, all these people come to my parties. Yeah, that's because you got good food and good music. But listen, when the food's done and the music shuts off, people are trying to get out of there. That's because you don't have a community. And so what we try to do is really try to pull out of people, let's find a deeper purpose than just the money. And the money for what purpose?
Okay, so
by the way, let me just say this. Your first community is your family, not necessarily biological. So what we recognize is some people are born into families that are not great. And they're not born into great family situations, blood family. Well, then go develop another family. right? Go develop that extended family.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the position you're in, and with these pillars and these firm values that you're sharing and that you live by, how did you develop those? Where did this strong sense of community and collective, working for the collective good? That's how I would describe it.
So that's a brilliant question, Byron. And to me, your question is, where do the seeds of that come from?
Okay.
Because I have formulated and developed this concept of the three pillars really just in the last maybe 10, 15 years. I think it was always there, but I hadn't really stopped to think about where am I going? What am I doing? And then what am I trying to help other people do? But the seeds of it come from those exact things, is that I've always been a part of a community. And again, I credit certainly my mother with a lot of it. My mother always made sure that her children were connected to people. It is what I saw when I was growing up. I could probably take it back to my grandparents. Same thing. Is that first community is family. So I think for a lot of us who are in our age group, when you went to the grandparents at least once a year, usually the summer. And when you got there, like, the family was there, the cousins that you don't see all year and so forth and so on. So I think the seeds of the philosophy have been there for a long time. Then I started thinking about it as my life played out. I have a tremendous extended family, of which, Byron, I certainly consider you a part of.
Oh, outstanding.
And
I'll stick a pin in that, because I did want to acknowledge that your support extends beyond the San Ynez area.
Absolutely.
And you are a supporter of CAC
Absolutely.
and 99.3 FM, and we appreciate that.
Well, and when you talk about extend beyond San Ynez, often, for those who don't know, San Ynez Valley does not have a large Black population. But people in San Ynez hear me talk about being connected to the Black community. And they're like, well, there's not very many Black people in San Ynez. And my retort usually is, what are you talking about? There's 43 million of us. Right? So I don't think of community as a geographic construct. There are 43 million Black people in this country. And I don't have the number at the tip of my fingers in terms of the number of Black folks around the world.
Okay.
But certainly in this country, I'm fairly well connected to Black communities across the country, actively engaging. Now, so people's like, well, guy, do you mean that's what I'm supposed to do? No, that's what I do. That's how I build and connect the community. I'm happy to help people figure out what's the best way for you to connect with community and build community. So I think the seeds, again, go back. My parents always had us engaged with organizations and people and relationships. So beyond just networking, again, I think a message for our audience is, beyond just networking, we're focused on building relationships. And from those relationships, we create community.
Okay, so you talk about the African American community, and that's a focus, clearly. Again, geographically, what would you say your client base, the breakdown is from a ethnic or from a cultural
I would say
perspective?
probably the majority of my clientele is not Black. And so, over the 30 years of doing this, most of the work that I tend to do is in a geographic area. We support a lot of people outside of our geographic area, but those folks don't necessarily become clients of mine often I am directing those individuals to people who are in some geographic proximity to themselves. I would say in the last 10, 12 years, we have intentionally focused on delivering a message to the African American community, in part because I think they're in greater need. And it's a longer, slower process, right? Because the learning curve is a bit steeper. But we're committed to that community. A lot of the business work that I do is with people who own businesses. And again, if you look at our community, there are less of us who own businesses. And so as a result, in terms of the people that I serve, and we'll serve anybody who comes to us with the right spirit, really. Some of that is a function of, I'm not really just trying to work with any and everybody. I'm trying to work with people who are coachable.
But you aren't turning folks away.
Yeah, no, we do.
Okay.
If you come to me with the spirit of primarily wanting a transaction and not a relationship, I may not be the best advisor for you. And so
that's an excellent principle.
Yeah. And, again, certainly at this stage of my life and in business, so forth and so on, early I said,
you don't have time.
Yeah, I said everything's integrated. So,
Yes.
listen, I'm trying to enjoy people that I'm hanging
I understand.
And so if I get a sense that this is not going to be enjoyable,
I understand.
yeah, we're probably sending you someplace else.
All right. Well, we're reminding you that that's the voice of Guy Walker, and I'm Byron K. Ward. And this program is sponsored by Wealth Management Strategies Incorporated. At Wealth Management Strategies, we don't believe in generating wealth for the sake of generating wealth. Instead, we help you infuse purpose into your work and wealth, so that you can live life meaningfully. Information is available at wealthmgtstrategies.com or 805-693-1773, or reach out to Guy directly at Guy R. Walker on LinkedIn. And we appreciate their support of this program. Well, we're in the home stretch on this journey, Guy.
Yeah.
So what's next for you?
Wow. So what's next? We're going to continue to build the business. The business really is about trying to help people find purpose in their lives through those three pillars of wealth. Certainly on the financial side, we're trying to help grow and protect people's wealth. But then on the community service, the social entrepreneurial piece, we're building a train across the country. And I informally talked to people about the Black Wealth Movement that I think I just recently discovered somebody has actually trademarked that. But the Black Wealth Movement has been, it really has probably been going since we got out of slavery. I think about W.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. So it's been talked about it. In the last 20 years, I've actively been involved with just some brilliant people who are about trying to show our community how to build sustainable wealth. And, the Endowment for Youth Community is one of the platforms that we're using to do that. I'm creating something that you'll be hearing about. Love to talk to you about doing some of this on your radio station, the Community Wealth Corner.
Okay.
That really just talks about how do we hold hands differently, how do we work together in a way that's a benefit for the entire community.
So you're just getting started.
Oh boy, can't wait. So people say, when are you retiring? I'm like, when they put the dirt on me.
Yeah, I hear you. I get asked that question too. So I've got to ask you about this. So in your work with wealth management and creating wealth in the African American community, you've got to have some idea about the reparations here in California.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so my thoughts, my opinions on reparations in California. I have some very definite thoughts about it. I mean, I think the first piece is if you think of reparations not just as money and trying to figure out how do we land on some number and figure out how to divvy it up amongst the number of folks in California or the country. But if you think about it as part of an atonement process, that tends to make more sense to me. I think the country would be better if they figured out how to acknowledge and embrace the fact of the original sin and speak to it in a meaningful way. So, the reality is you could probably search congressional records, and there's probably something in the congressional records where the government has essentially said, ooh, we're sorry, but they haven't said it in a way that the Black community knows about it or hears it or feels it. But I think that's good for the country. It's not just good for Black people. I think, again, certainly as somebody who comes out of the Christian faith, forgiveness is not really about the other person, it's about you.
Okay.
It's about being able to release that stuff. And so I think it would be good. Having said that, I implore our community, stop waiting around for it. I don't have a lot of faith that the government or the people, whatever that is, I don't have a lot of faith, and I'm not waiting for them to write me a check. I'm like, let's go create our own reparations.
Is that a string of wealth management strategies?
I would say so. I would say through community wealth. First of all, often when I hear these conversations, I look at people like, are you waiting for somebody to say I'm sorry? And it's like, so how's that been working out for you? And what is your experience in terms of, you can go through the litany of just stuff that has happened in our community. I sort of wince when I hear people say, well, thank goodness for cell phones, because now we can actually document and show people. I'm like, I've seen footage from back in the 1900s. I've seen a lot of footage from the 60s. So it's not like, oh, now that we got cell phones, now they'll say, I'm sorry. So again, I appreciate the people who are doing the work on the reparations. I'm working on the other piece. I'm like, hey, community, while we're working on that, let me show you some strategies where we can build our own wealth and we can protect our own families and we can prepare the next generation of children to not have to depend on somebody writing you a check other than your family.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah.
So give us a final thought for our audience this morning. It's just been a interesting conversation, a lot of wisdom and value in our talk today. But what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, Byron, I love when you drop that on me because it is good. I'm good with this stuff, but it's like you want me to be spontaneous on that. So the first thing that popped into my mind is a quote that says, I do not wish to live what is not life, and when I come to die, I discover I have not lived at all. That's Henry
Never
David
heard
Thoreau.
that one.
Henry David Thoreau.
Thoreau, okay.
For anybody out there, but I am speaking to the Black community. Shed your fears. Find your cultural wealth. Find and look inside about who you are and what you're about. And figure out a way to move beyond the boogeyman. Let's build some community wealth. And let's not obsess about capital wealth. What I would tell you, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, if you gave me the choice between a tremendous amount of capital wealth or a tremendous amount of cultural and community wealth, I take the latter. Byron, the young man I'm looking at, I would tell you I would never go hungry. It doesn't matter if I get a paycheck.
Okay.
The level of community wealth that I have built over my 65 years, I'll never go hungry, and I'll never not have a roof over my head.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, he's Guy R. Walker of Wealth Management Strategies Incorporated. And you're listening to Byron K. Ward presents Business Leadership with Action. And this show is underwritten and produced by Action Human Technologies, LLC. Our program is broadcast live from the studios of 99.3 FM KJBU in Oxnard, California at 9 a.m. Pacific Time and streaming live on 99threefm.com and available on demand at 99threefm.com and video at byronkward.com. Reach out to us on LinkedIn at Byron K. Ward, Instagram, Byron K. Ward, Twitter at Byron K. Ward, and Facebook, Byron K. Ward. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Byron K. Ward. Thank you all.